The winter mornings at St. Augustine Memorial Hospital in Boston always smelled like antiseptic and rain. The windows would fog slightly from the clash of outside cold and sterile indoor heat, and the quiet hum of machines felt like a heartbeat of their own, steady, relentless, carrying life forward even when hope seemed faint. For 24-year-old nurse Emma Lawson, those mornings always began before sunrise, before the city fully shook itself awake, before Starbucks opened its doors 2 blocks down, before the world began demanding things she wasn't sure she could give. Yet she gave anyway, because caring for people, even when they couldn't see her, hear her, or thank her, was the one thing she believed gave her meaning. Room 407 was always her first stop. It had been her first stop for 3 months. Inside lay Ethan Montgomery, 32 years old, billionaire tech founder, philanthropist, the kind of man whose face had been on Forbes covers, the kind of person she used to see on YouTube interviews when she wanted motivation. He had built something extraordinary, software that made hospitals, school systems, and charities run smoother, faster, and more efficiently. People called him the good billionaire, a title Emma wasn't sure she believed any billionaire truly earned, but she also had seen enough families abandoning loved ones in long-term comas to know morals weren't defined by wealth alone. Ethan's accident had been sudden. Car crash, icy roads, driver survived, Ethan didn't quite. At least, not fully. Brain trauma, swelling. His world had gone dark, and since that day, he had breathed only because machines reminded his lungs how. His parents were gone, and the only visitor he ever got was his sister Ava, who came once a week, always pale, always crying quietly into her scarf, always asking Emma if there was any change. There never was. Not until the day everything shifted. Emma stood by his bed, pulling on gloves and warming the water in a basin. She checked his vitals, freshened linens, adjusted IV lines, and murmured quietly as she worked because she believed coma patients could still somehow feel presence, still hear warmth, still know if someone cared or not. Some nurses were brisk, efficient, mechanical. Emma moved gently, deliberately. She didn't know why. Maybe because she thought if she ever fell asleep inside her body like that, she'd hope someone would still treat her like she mattered. And then there was the bathing. The part that most nurses rushed, but for Emma, it was ritual. Warm cloth, soft strokes, gentle movements, nothing invasive or inappropriate, only the careful dignity that every human deserved even when unconscious. She warmed his hands between towels, wiped his forehead, cleaned his neck, and spoke softly as she did it. "You've got a little stubble today," she murmured, dabbing around his jaw. "Looks like you're trying to grow a beard on us. Very rugged billionaire of you." She smiled at her own joke, then sighed, brushing a damp strand of hair back from her cheek. Her ponytail was always messy by hour 1 of her shift, and even though her scrubs were neatly pressed, there was always something about mornings that made her look slightly undone, like she was always running towards something but hadn't reached it yet. "You know," she whispered, "your sister brought in that playlist you used to love. I played it yesterday. I swear your heart monitor ticked up when the acoustic songs came on." Maybe it was coincidence, but maybe not. She dipped the cloth again, wiping near his temple, feeling a strange quiet peace in the room. Not sadness, but stillness, like winter snow falling outside, gentle and silent and inevitable. "I believe people come back when they're ready," she said softly. "I hope you're getting closer." His breathing machine hissed rhythmically, and she leaned over slightly to adjust the pillow under his head. The cloth slid across his collarbone, and then, just as she moved to rinse it again, she froze. His finger moved. Barely. Just the faintest twitch, like a whisper beneath the skin. Emma blinked. Breath caught, heart stuttering. "Ethan." Her voice was fragile, hopeful, terrified to hope too much. She stepped closer, watching his hand intently. Maybe she imagined it. Muscle spasm. Nothing more. That's what logic said. But then his eyelids trembled, the smallest flutter like butterfly wings brushing glass. Emma gasped softly and instinctively reached for his hand. It's okay, she whispered, voice gentle but shaking. If you can hear me, you're safe. Take your time. His breaths remained steady, his heart monitor unchanged, yet she swore something under his skin had awakened. A flicker, a spark, something ancient and stubborn and alive. And then, impossibly, he opened his eyes. Not fully, not with awareness, but enough, just enough for his gaze to unfocus across the ceiling, pupils shifting, consciousness clawing its way toward the world. Emma's heart lodged in her throat, panic and awe crashing together like two storms colliding. Dr. Price, she called, voice rising, still gripping his hand. We have movement in 407. I need a neurologist now. But she didn't leave him. Something inside her wouldn't let go, not until she knew this wasn't a dream. His fingers curled faintly around hers. It was the lightest pressure, but it was real. Ethan, you're here, she whispered, tears suddenly blurring her eyes. Oh God, you're really here. By the time the medical team rushed in, Dr. Price with his silver beard and rushed commands, nurses adjusting monitors, a respiratory therapist checking settings, Emma had stepped aside, letting them take over with trained precision. She watched like she was outside her body, numb and shaking. Minimal eye response, Price murmured, checking pupils. Motor reflex coming back. He's emerging from the coma. This is remarkable. Emma, notify neurosurgery and get his family on the line. She nodded, stumbling slightly as she stepped out into the hall, grabbing the rail for support. For 3 months she'd walked this corridor half asleep, but now every detail slammed into her. Harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant, the squeak of shoes, the distant buzz of nurses at the station. Everything felt too sharp, too bright, too real. She called Ava, stumbling over her own voice. He's waking up, she breathed. Ava, Ethan's waking up. The choked sob on the other end nearly shattered her. By lunchtime, the hospital buzzed with whispered awe. People in comas woke sometimes, yes, but rarely after so long, and rarely with signs of cognitive clarity so quickly. Ethan was still weak, still barely responsive, but he was awake. Alive in a way that felt like witnessing somebody breathe their soul back in. When Emma returned to his room later, after the doctors had run tests and monitors beeped steadily, she found him looking out the window, eyes open, slow blinking, but aware. Aware like someone hearing music far away but recognizing the song. She stepped closer quietly. He turned. Slow, heavy, but deliberate. His gaze found her, unsteady but focused, and his lips moved, dry, cracked, forming something not yet sound but shaped in tension. She hurried to moisten his lips with swabs and whispered, "You don't need to speak yet. Just rest. You're safe." But he kept looking at her, brow furrowing slightly like he was trying to remember a dream or anchor himself to something familiar. When his fingers twitched again, she instinctively offered her hand. He squeezed it. Not strong, not fully confident, but real. So real she could barely breathe. "I'm Emma," she said softly. "Your nurse. I've been here with you." His mouth formed one more slow shape, and she leaned close to catch the faintest whisper of air. "Warm," he breathed, barely there. Emma blinked. "Warm." His eyelids lowered, just a flicker, but she understood. Her voice had been warmth in his darkness. Her presence, her hands, her care. "You felt me," she whispered. A faint nod. Her chest ached, something fierce and bright blooming through her ribs, unstoppable. She squeezed back. "I'm not going anywhere." His sister burst in moments later, crying and kissing his forehead, and Emma quietly stepped back, giving them space, her heart still thrumming like she'd run miles. She stayed late that night, long after her shift ended, just sitting in the dim hallway outside his room, unable to let the day go. Miracles didn't happen like this. Not in real life. Not in fluorescent lit hospital corridors where budgets were tight, patients died alone, and hope often felt like a luxury. Yet here he was. Breathing. Awake. Alive. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's recovery was slow but astonishing. Physical therapy, speech exercises, cognitive tests. At first, he spoke in short phrases, voice raspy like sandpaper. Then sentences. Then questions. So many questions. How long was I out? Who kept talking to me? Why am I alive when others in crashes aren't? And often, quietly, am I still me? Emma answered what she could, offered silence when she couldn't, and every day she saw more of him return. Sarcasm, intelligence, frustration, vulnerability. Even fear. Nobody told you waking up could be terrifying, like learning to breathe as a newborn but remembering adulthood too. But she could see it in him, deep and raw. Sometimes he wouldn't sleep at night, and she'd find him staring at ceiling tiles, trapped in existential limbo. When she walked in, he'd always look relieved, as though her presence pulled him back from somewhere lonely. How do you always know when I need help? He asked once in a voice too fragile for someone who'd once commanded boardrooms. She shrugged, offering a half smile. Some people look fine until someone looks close. I guess I look close. He stared at her then. Not with confusion or fog, but clarity. Sharp, grateful, a little odd. No one had ever looked at Emma that way, and it frightened her, because she could feel a line forming, a fragile boundary she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. But nurses didn't fall for patience. And billionaires didn't look twice at ordinary girls. Life wasn't a movie. Reality demanded rules. Still, every morning she found herself humming when she entered his room, and every time he smiled at her, something inside her stitched together pieces she hadn't realized had been torn. Everyone whispered about him. Of course, doctors impressed, interns starstruck, reporters trying to sniff the story out. The city buzzed with the miracle recovery of Ethan Montgomery. But none of them were there in the silence at 2 a.m. when he woke gasping from nightmares and she pressed a cold cloth to his forehead. None of them sat with him when he struggled to lift weights that once would have been effortless for him. None of them heard him whisper, "I don't want to be alone anymore." One afternoon, while snow drifted past the window in lazy flakes, he watched her chart notes and suddenly asked, "Why nursing?" She glanced up, surprised. "Why not nursing? You're brilliant," he said simply. "You could be anything." She swallowed, pen pausing. "Some people want power or success or brilliance. I just want people to feel safe." He stared at her long enough for her pulse to misbehave, then nodded like she'd told him the secret to gravity. "You made me feel safe," he said softly. She looked away, because if she met his eyes right then, she might forget every rule she'd ever had to protect her own heart. Recovery turned to walking. Walking turned to strength. Strength turned to plans for discharge. He would leave soon, and she pretended her stomach didn't knot every time she remembered. The night before his release, he asked for a walk down the rehab hall. She supported him lightly, his steps steady but slow. Fluorescent lights glowed above them, painting everything clinical and real. "You changed my life," he said quietly, steps halting. "Ethan. No. Listen." His voice shook. Not weak. Emotional. Vulnerable. "I was gone. I was nothing. And you brought me back. I heard you. I held onto you. And now every morning I wake up and the world feels different, brighter, like I'm borrowing a second life I don't deserve and I don't know what to do with it." Her breath shook. "You recovered because of you. Not me." He looked at her like she was the only honest thing in existence. "We both know that's not true." Silence wrapped around them, thick and trembling. For a moment, she felt time pause, the world holding its breath. But she exhaled. "Tomorrow you start a new chapter. And what if I want you in it?" Her heart stumbled so hard she had to grip the rail. "Ethan. You're grateful. That's all this is." He shook his head, slow and certain. "No. Gratitude fades. This doesn't." She swallowed a lump thick as winter. "I can't be a fantasy you built in recovery. I'm not part of your world." He stepped closer. Carefully, deliberately, not touching her, but near enough she could feel warmth radiating from him like the first hint of spring. You are my world right now. And I want to know what that means when I'm whole again. Her voice trembled. Then go get whole. His eyes softened. And if I come back? She smiled sadly. Then we'll see. The next morning, he left. Cameras. Applause. Ava hugging Emma fiercely whispering, he talked about you nonstop. But Ethan only gave Emma a single look at the exit. Quiet, intense, a promise tucked between heartbeats. Weeks passed. She threw herself into work. Same halls. Same patients. Same routine. But something ached quietly in her every time she passed room 407. Still, life moved. Bills needed paying. Patients needed feeding, bathing, comforting. She kept going, steady as heartbeat monitors, because life didn't stop for love, not even the kind that might have bloomed in ICU shadows. Then one rainy afternoon, 3 months later, a nurse rushed to her. Emma, you have a visitor in the garden. Visitor. She walked outside, heart thudding. The hospital garden was small. Stone benches, winter flowers trying to survive cold air, a fountain trickling quietly. And there he was, standing, strong, healthy, better than she'd ever seen him. Dressed in a soft gray coat, scarf at his neck, hair brushed by gentle wind, eyes steady, no tremor in his hands anymore. Whole. He smiled, slow and breathtaking. Hi. Her breath hitched. Hi. You said to come back when I was whole. He spread his arms slightly, half playful, half raw. I'm here. Before she could speak, he stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't come to repay anything. I didn't come because I owe you my life. I came because you feel like the reason I want one. Tears stung her eyes. The fountain behind him whispered like the universe holding its breath again. You don't owe me anything, she whispered. I know. That's why this is real. She laughed through tears, shaking her head helplessly. What now? We start small, he said softly, with certainty. Coffee. Walks. Getting to know each other outside hospital walls. You don't have to decide anything today. Just don't shut the door before we see what's on the other side. She stared at him. This man who had been silent, still, lost beneath tubes and machines, who woke to her voice and now stood in front of her whole, alive, choosing her not because she saved him, but because life after waking pointed him here. She stepped forward, heart trembling. Okay. He exhaled like he'd been holding breath for months. They didn't touch, not yet. But they smiled the kind of smiles people only smiled when the universe gave them back something they thought they'd lost. And in the quiet hospital garden, under soft winter rain, Emma realized miracles weren't loud or blinding. Sometimes they came slowly, like dawn, like breath returning, like someone waking from darkness and reaching for you with shaking hands until one day they stood strong and chosen, saying, without speaking, thank you for bringing me back. Now let me walk the rest with you. And so they began, one step at a time. Not ode, not fantasy, not fate forced by circumstance, just two people learning life again, finding light not in miracles, but in the quiet courage that followed them. Together, one gentle breath at a time, they stepped into a world neither expected but both chose, with warmth guiding the way, the kind that reached even those trapped in silence until they found their way home again.